Elon Musk, the president-elect's co-chair of the new Department of Government Efficiency, is taking OpenAI to court. Yes, the manufacturer of ChatGPT, the chatbot that is revolutionizing how people interact. Musk is claiming the organization has abandoned its nonprofit roots in favor of a for-profit mission. But there's a twist. OpenAI's structure was never really quite a nonprofit, even from its start. So today we're breaking down what happens when mission-driven organizations blend profit motives, how corporate law handles this hybrid model, and what it all means for the future of AI and business ethics. Welcome back to Organize, the business law breakdown. I'm your host, Professor Seth C. Oranburg, and today we're delving into the complex intersection of nonprofit structures, corporate law, and artificial intelligence. We're focusing on recent developments surrounding OpenAI and Elon Musk. I'm honored to be joined by our distinguished guest, Professor Anat Alon-Beck, a professor of law at Case Western Reserve University School of Law. Anat's research centers on corporate law and governance, with a particular emphasis on the dynamics of private and public market and the rise of unicorn firms. Those are privately held startups valued at over $1 billion. Her work has frequently been cited by policymakers, judges, and leading scholars, and she is a contributor to Bloomberg Law, where she discusses corporate law, governance, finance, and unicorns. Anat, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to discuss actually something I've been researching for a few years now, and that is the intersection between public, private, and nonprofit. And of course, Elon Musk, we're going to be discussing one of my favorite topics, and that is Elon's work.
Well, today we're going to be tackling three big questions that relate to all of those, and really presenting your research front and center here, because this is really about that space between for-profit, nonprofit, public, and private. We're kind of mixing those things together by asking a few questions. First, what happens when a nonprofit mixes profit motives with its mission? Does this hybrid model push boundaries in a responsible or appropriate way, or is this a problem? Second, how do tax benefits and nonprofit status factor in? Are there legal consequences when an organization transitions from a nonprofit mission or form to a for-profit one? So could OpenAI and maybe some of the people who benefit from OpenAI, like its employees that were promised some benefits, are there retroactive liabilities? And third, we'll discuss governance and accountability, which include hybrid models that challenge traditional corporate law. Do they need stricter oversight? Should we actually be more lax and allow a million flowers to bloom? What role should courts, regulators, and powerful people like Elon Musk play? So we're going to touch on these issues today, in part because they're not just about OpenAI. It's sort of an avenue into talking about how we balance profit, purpose, and innovation in this whole age of artificial intelligence generally. It's a really big topic, but we'll address it in our brief podcast today and break it down by starting with the story of OpenAI. And as many people know, but so that everyone's on board, OpenAI was founded in 2015 with the mission of ensuring artificial intelligence benefits humanity. So it was organized as a nonprofit, and you can tell that mission statement prioritizes the public benefit, the benefits to humanity. But in 2019, among much criticism, OpenAI shifted gears. It adopted a hybrid structure with what it called a capped profit model, which allowed some fundraising so it could compete with tech giants. Basically said it had to do this in order to be competitive with Google's and Microsoft's, and for that matter, Tesla. So Musk has a role there. And this is a lot. Can you explain what the capped profit model means in practice and what we're dealing with in terms of these organizations?
Sure, and I'm so happy we're discussing it because a few years ago when I started researching and writing about this topic, people thought I was crazy. They're like, it's not going to happen here. And I'm like, well, you're missing the trend. It's definitely going to happen. People are saying it's going to happen, and entrepreneurs are going down that route. And so let's start with OpenAI's capped profit model. Basically, what it means is that you have a compromise. The founders, the entrepreneurs are compromising between a nonprofit and a traditional for-profit model for their company. It allows investors to earn returns but only up to a set limit. Therefore, the organization can attract capital, and you know how much capital is so important for innovation, without entirely abandoning its mission. Usually it's a public mission, right? In OpenAI's case, early investors could earn returns up to 100 times their investment. But any profits that are beyond are meant to flow back into the nonprofit parent organization. And let me just say one more thing, and that is that you have to remember that OpenAI's governance structure is very unique. And so it's designed to balance a very ambitious mission, and that is they want to advance artificial general intelligence, AGI, for the benefit of humanity, but they also want to achieve practical considerations and means like funding, innovation, and they also need to exercise oversight. And this is where we are in this new world where all these things are kind of coming together.
So it sounds like they kind of want to have it all. You want to be a nonprofit to benefit humanity, and you want to be a for-profit and make money. I don't know. If I'm going to be a little skeptical, I could call it the sort of excuse is that if you don't make money, you can't compete. Nonprofits can't compete with for-profit companies. And so you have to make a little eensy bit or 100x profits to actually achieve the social benefit. That sounds like the claim. And not, let's just go to traditional nonprofits for a second, because this model seems a little wacky to me. Maybe you'll explain why it's okay or why it's not.
Oh, it's wacky to me as well. And absolutely.
Okay.
Even though I've been writing about it, I'll admit it's wacky.
Wacky. Okay. So what's the standard nonprofit model? Do nonprofits typically have investors?
So no, not in the traditional sense. Nonprofits, the traditional nonprofits, they're funded by donations, by grants, or by government support, right? These sources do not expect financial returns. And this is exactly what makes OpenAI situations unusual. Because OpenAI created a for-profit subsidiary, which means that OpenAI basically blurred these lines. So they have a capped profit model, and that sounds very innovative, but it also raises questions about whether the organization is staying true to its original nonprofit commitments during the transition between the models.
Let me get this straight, Anat. Are you saying that OpenAI, a nonprofit, owns a for-profit company? Can you do that?
Well, that's their structure, right? And they have a very unique structure where they have basically a subsidiary that is a for-profit subsidiary. And that's why they're getting this criticism that we're discussing. The way they did it is also as the public benefit corporation, right at the top. The structure is very different than the traditional nonprofit structure. I just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, let's actually stay with that for a second. I mean, a traditional nonprofit would be organized as a not-for-profit corporation.
Correct. Correct.
What is a public benefit corporation? How is that different from a not-for-profit?
So that's a new hybrid that I talked about, and that is exactly for that purpose, is to allow you to achieve these different purposes. And that is the public and private benefits that we've been talking about. And what it does is that it allows you to not only maximize profits, okay? And so you have a structure that allows the top, right, to regain governance and oversight authority to ensure that the mission of the structure is going to benefit humanity. And then they also created an arm that is called OpenAI LP, and that is really the operational arm of OpenAI. And that arm is supposed to handle research, development, and the ways in which you commercialize the AI technology. And they also have investors, and that arm also attracts external funding from major investors, for example, Microsoft. And like I told you, I've been writing about this. So Nitzan, Pakin, Geslevich, and I have a paper on board observers where, we discuss basically the OpenAI relationship with Microsoft. And we can't have this discussion without also bringing Microsoft into the picture. Microsoft has a significant partnership with OpenAI. By the way, it also provides infrastructure to OpenAI, but also financial backing. And I think that's the issue that some people have concern or criticism about. And that is that you have a for-profit entity really investing in this entity and also has some sort of collaboration. And it's not just for research purposes, but also has financial incentives.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers here that make this not your typical, like, I don't know. When you think of a nonprofit, maybe think of Greenpeace or your local church where
Yeah.
it does something as a well recognized benefit. It's got a pretty simple structure. Maybe they have some subsidiaries, but for the most part, you got a kind of flat structure. Here, you've got this public benefit corporation, which is not, by the way, a not for profit corporation. So it wasn't even founded in that kind of form. Plus, you've got a subsidiary, which is for profit and a partnership with Microsoft. All right, it's at least confusing, but why does Elon Musk care? Why is our buddy Musk upset about this one now? Is he just on a tweet storm because he likes to rant about stuff, or has he got some legitimacy here?
Well, first of all, I think he does have legitimacy here. I also understand the critics that, of course, are criticizing Musk, but remember that Musk was one of the early founders of this. And if you remember, in 2015 until up through, I think, 2019, this was just a nonprofit entity. Then they converted. And in 2018, Musk, according to reports, is left, right? And so he's really upset about what he's seeing. And I think we're going to delve into that a little more. Why is he concerned? What are the questions? And also, what's the criticism? And he filed a lawsuit, by the way, against him.
Yeah. Yeah, so that got a lot of attention. Plus, he's moving into this new government position and he presumptively has Donald Trump's ear, and so there's some power there too. One reason I think people care about this might be based on a myth actually that I want to test and maybe bust. So, seems like Musk suggested that OpenAI, because they're a nonprofit, gets federal tax benefits. And one reason why we should be upset that people are making money on their investment in OpenAI is because they got tax benefits. So basically, the United States taxpayers, everyone listening to this podcast for the most part, somehow subsidize people to get filthy rich by pretending to be, right? I mean, people are getting filthy rich over this, right? This is a ridiculously billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar, trillion-dollar potential kind of company. So, is it true that nonprofit corporations or public benefit corporations don't pay taxes?
Not at all. To get the federal tax benefits, a nonprofit actually has to qualify as a 501c3 under the IRS rules. And that status, this 501c3 status, exempts the organization from federal income taxes. Basically, it allows donors to deduct their contributions. But again, remember, this qualification is not automatic. So you have to apply, you have to meet certain very strict criteria. For example, operating exclusively for public benefit, avoiding private instances like this, which means you cannot benefit from investors, for example.
Even if you're like a low profit, public benefit corporation, or maybe an L3C, kind of a variety on the LLC, you can't qualify for nonprofit status, even if you have a little profit. A nonprofit tax status literally means no return on investment.
So that's why OpenAI is a public benefit corporation, and that is a PBC. And it's a for profit legal entity that incorporates a commitment to a specific benefit into its charter. And unlike traditional corporations or nonprofits, I would think about the following. Traditional corporations focus primarily on maximizing shareholder value, right? And nonprofits cannot take profit motivations. They cannot take investor money. PBCs have to balance the financial interests of their shareholders. They have to balance the broader public benefit that is stated in their charter. They have to do all that with the interests of other stakeholders, employees, communities, the environment. And so it's a completely different animal.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I understand OpenAI structure better now. Although, as we talked about, it's wacky, and we have a couple of corporate law scholars and lawyers who are like, "Yeah, this is weird and unusual. It's kind of a little platypussy of the world here." So it's a
Yeah,
little
so
weird to understand.
yeah, well, if I had to kind of quickly summarize it, basically the hybrid structure, big picture means that OpenAI operates as a hybrid entity. On the top, you have this nonprofit parent company, right? Which is called OpenAI. And it provides oversight and ensures adherence to OpenAI's mission, which is the public mission. Then we have a subsidiary, and the subsidiary, one of them, by the way, is a for profit subsidiary. And that subsidiary conducts commercial operations to fund its research and development, and it gets funding from others. And let me just say one more thing, and that is they are operating, as you stated, in a capped profit model. It means that investors and employees can earn a return on their investment, but that return is capped. That's why we call it capped profit model. And here it's capped at 100x.
Anat, let's talk about Elon Musk's charge against OpenAI that says they're basically stealing money from the people. They're stealing money from the taxpayers because they're operating as a nonprofit. And as a result, they're not paying taxes for their profits, and their investors aren't really treated as investors. I did a little research before we jumped on this call, and I was able to find that OpenAI registered as a nonprofit in 2015. It filed, it has, you can find this, by the way, on the internet if you're following along at home. You can find what's called Form 990, which is the returns of organizations exempt from income tax. You can learn a lot about the company's assets. Like, for example, I can tell you that in 2020 filed and it had $18 million in net assets at that point, which is probably a lot less than it may have now. So let's assume, just for the purpose of argument and discussion, because that there's definitely some complexity here. Let's assume that OpenAI has been getting nonprofit tax benefits even after 2019, even after they incorporated this new subsidiary. I'm going to ask two questions about this. Kind of one is looking back and one is looking forward. Looking forward, if we assume that OpenAI is currently getting benefits as a nonprofit, is not paying federal income tax, is registered and filing its Form 990s, if it goes ahead and changes to a public benefit corporation at the highest level and is able to generate up to 100x returns for investors, would that disqualify it from any further tax benefits there?
Thank you so much, Seth. I love this question, especially since I went and what I immediately did was I asked ChatGPT, and guess what?
Of course.
What ChatGPT said? Oh, they don't use a 501c3, and I'm like, really? Because Seth, I just took a look and we saw some filings before, at least until 2022. But let me actually, I just thought it was a funny anecdote. Let me just, so if the IRS does find that an organization misrepresented its operation or that an organization did not comply with the IRS rules, then the IRS can revoke the 5C3 status and assess back taxes. And by the way, that's a huge risk. That's a significant risk, especially for a hybrid model like OpenAI, where, there's going to be a ton of legal gray areas. But again, I don't want to comment specifically on OpenAI because it's just not clear to me today in 2024 or, next year in 2025, how they're filing. We need to learn a little bit more about that.
Okay, maybe we'll have a follow-up podcast with a tax expert too to talk about all of that status. But there's definitely
Absolutely.
there's definitely some interesting, at least for lawyers, complexity around that. And a key point that you're making that I want to reiterate is that if OpenAI has been getting tax breaks because of its nonprofit status, the IRS could claw back those benefits, could basically charge it back taxes with penalties, interests, all that kind of stuff, all the way back to whenever they began operating with some inappropriate ways that did not comply with 501c3. And that's maybe a threat that Musk and the Trump administration can have if they do want to prevent a private corporation, which OpenAI is, from changing its status, which typically can do.
And let me just put just a small caveat on that as well, because I just don't know how they've been filing their taxes. And that is, don't forget, we also have the for-profit arm, right? So again, I don't know how their lawyers handled that situation as well.
All
So
right.
but that would be
We'll get the tax lawyers and accountants to dig in on that one. Let's talk
exact.
about the ethics and the mission then. Let's go back to the core of the corporate law issue, which
Sure.
is about whether or not really OpenAI is acting in a ethical and appropriate way. So I think there are, as we talked about earlier, kind of arguments on both sides with this capped profit model and this idea of being not a nonprofit in order to benefit humanity. I think the goal, as I understand it simply, is that OpenAI said it needed to attract funding to stay competitive. That if it didn't have this ability to return money to investors, even quote limited money, because 100x return on investment is limited in the venture finance world, then others would come in and just on a totally for-profit basis commercialize AI, and then AI robots would take over the world and humanity would suffer like it did in the Dune movies or something like that. But Musk and others argue that this is a betrayal of the original mission and that the mission is almost, I don't know, permanent. Like there's some kind of deontological, duty bound, ethics that a company has to stay with its mission. So there's a concept here called mission drift.
Mhm.
And, there's a concern about whether mission drift is a problem or whether it's a reality. So for our listeners that may not be familiar with the business management literature, what exactly is mission drift? And then let's talk about it.
Sure, that's a great question, actually, because as you said, some of the critics of OpenAI are saying, wait a minute, this is not what we signed up for, right? We signed up to a company that's mission is to ensure AI development, that it's safe for humanity. We trusted you. Who is we? The public
Hmm.
trusted you. And basically what they're saying, hey, you're a pet now. We don't know what's going on. And I think it reflects broader on these hybrid models, right? Can we as society even regain trust? Or is there always going to be an inherent challenge to this type of structure? And I think first that we have to track, have they changed their initial mission? Because mission is very, very important in the nonprofit world, also in the public benefit world, right? And that is, are you truly committed to your mission? Are you consistent with your mission? Because the key point here is trust. Can the public regain its trust? And to regain trust, we want the organization to be transparent. We want there to be clear governance. We want it to be consistent, committed to its mission. Okay? And these hybrid models like OpenAI are so challenging because they always inherently ask stakeholders to trust the organization, but the organization is now balancing something that we didn't allow entities to do before, and that is to balance profit with public benefit. By the way, a corporation can do that too, and that is one of the arguments is that you can do that in the corporation as long as you're specific about it. But you need to have strong safeguard and communication. Otherwise, the trust is going to erode very quickly because, again, the main thing is you're saying you're taking other interests into account. Are you really doing? Or is there some fraud or illegality or anything else that's hiding there around that is going to make us distrust you? And once that trust is broken, it's going to be very hard to regain that trust.
Yeah, I was listening to an interview with Warren Buffett. Yeah, the guy who runs Berkshire Hathaway. He's made a few dollars in his day.
Absolutely.
He's done pretty well. And in this interview, Buffett was talking about how you don't do everything you can do. You do what you should do. Ethics are important. Ethics are relevant to engaging in business because in terms of if you want to make money, you can make money today by going all the way to the legal limits of what's permittable under law. But if you violate ethics even once, you may not get business and customers the second time. And AI seems to be one of these areas where trust is really important because you give it your personal information. You're giving access to your data. Your people are developing emotional relationships with it. There was a story of a 14-year-old boy who committed suicide after his AI relationship turned sour he had kind of invented an AI character. So people are really emotionally invested in these. How does this capped profit structure potentially undermine the ethical ambitions that OpenAI had?
That's a great question. And I think it also um, delves into what is it that we want, I think, the government to do with this regard, right? I mean, so we have this issue, right? And we have these new frameworks and all this new legal gray area because these hybrids operate in the gray area, which makes it very hard to hold them accountable. And so we need a clear legal structure. And that's what I've been saying for years. We need a clear legal structure. We need to set expectations. We need transparency. We need governance. We definitely need profit limitations without stifling innovation. By the way, I'm a huge supporter of innovation policy. And I think this is really a historical time here for the US where I'm hoping that the government will take a very active position and encourage innovation. This is the moment when I would love to see more investment in innovation. We need it. But remember, it's a very, very delicate balance because, on the one hand, over-regulation could discourage these types of organizations from exploring hybrid models altogether. And we know that's the future. It's already happening. So we don't want to stifle innovation on the one hand and create more red tape. On the other, we want to protect the public, right? And so we're going to see balance. And I think the government is going to be stepping in here and balancing these issues.
And that government includes Elon Musk. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, he's front and center now with regards to this.
And Musk, he wanted to partner Tesla with OpenAI, right? And then OpenAI ended up partnering with Microsoft. So, as we're talking about ethics here, and I'm thinking out loud a bit, it kind of spooks me that this guy who has such a vested interest and seems kind of vitriolic sometimes is going to be the crusader. Does the government have a responsibility to not have these conflicts of interest too? Is Musk like too involved in this, or am I just kind of imagining things?
So let me say a few things. This is a great question. And by the way, a lot of critics are currently raising it. So let's just start historically, and then we'll talk about Musk individually, okay? And that is, just so you know, historically, we've always had business leaders taking part in government affairs and regulations, either directly, they're being appointed, or indirectly, like in this case, okay? And so this is nothing new. It's just that Musk is our new billionaire, right? Before, here in Cleveland, we had other types. We had railroads, we had oil. This is nothing new. It's just that we are in the information technology world today. This is what's booming, and that's why we're talking about Musk. And that is also why Musk has influence, and his influence is so significant. It's important, but it's also complicated. Okay. Let me explain why, because I promised I was going to do that. And by the way, it's not unique. I mean, we've had that historically before, because on the one hand, he is uniquely positioned to push for stronger oversight of AI development. And he has the expertise and he has the industry presence. I mean, we can't take that away from him, right? And like I said, we've always had business people taking lead roles in their capacity as industry leaders. They have the knowledge, and that's okay. We've been okay with that as a society. But I will also put a caveat in and say, I truly hope that he's using good advisors on this and around this, and I'll explain in a second, okay? Because what critics, on the other hand, are concerned about is that his business interests can also create potential conflicts. Critics, right, are actually going after him, and they say he's using his government role to shape regulations in a way that favors his ventures, which could undermine the credibility of this entire regulatory process. So I think everything is fixable, by the way, because we've had this before. Okay. I think the Musk needs to be very careful here. And I hope that he's going to be using the right kind of advisor around him on this to help guide this process. Like everything else, it's all about the process, right? You teach about paper process in corporate law, right? And
Sure.
so we can do anything. It just depends on the disclosure and the process of how we're doing it.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about setting up that process and sort of move back into our realm of kind of good governance. I will say, putting my cards on the table, not only do I believe in good process, but I believe in rules that are universally applicable. And that's where our equal protection laws come from. And that's where the principle of fairness goes to. Fairness in our law often requires equal application and not very, personalized attacks because of vendettas. And that was a big concern. A lot of people have raised those kind of concerns with this particular administrative shift. So without diving into all those politics, let's step back and think about some of the big picture rules about governance of these kind of organizations. Have you done any research or thinking around how these type of public benefit or low profit or capped profit structures could be governed in a way which is ethical and which would apply beyond OpenAI?
Absolutely. As you know, governance is my game. So I've been honestly um, writing and thinking about it also in different kind of policy work groups and thinking groups with other professors. And we're trying to think about how do we design a system that is adaptable yet robust, right?
Mhm.
And what we think is that actually, let me put a caveat. I think, okay, and that's my personal opinion because we have different, in the group with, law professors, you get different opinions. I think that regulators need to work closely with industry leaders because that's the only way that they can really understand the challenges and the opportunities. Okay. But I also believe that you need to maintain independence to ensure fairness. And that's why I said it's all depends on the process. How are you doing this? And that is, we want to create a system where, A, you also get public input because that's also crucial. AI is going to affect everyone. So you want to have that as well. And governance, again, doesn't happen in a vacuum. And so if you bring all the players together to the table, I think we could do anything.
So the idea here is that you're not necessarily saying you've got the final answer to the ultimate structure, but you think that there's a process to arrive at the right kind of governance for these novel organizations. And another thing I think I heard you say that I'd love to confirm or you can deny is that you think that these hybrid organizations are worthwhile, that you don't want to see them shut down. You think that the world seems to be better off because we have more than just the for-profit form and the nonprofit form. Having these intermediary type of organizations that serve different purposes, you see value there. It's just a question of getting people together to really come up with better, clearer, fairer rules through a process. Did I frame that right, or would you like to clarify your position?
Sure. So I think, again, as a society, we are at a turning point, and I could see this coming to this stage. Okay. So I'm not surprised. But AI, think about this story is basically a wake up call to all these people who told me we're not going to see this happening. Well, we are. And this is the point where we need to start thinking about, and that's what we do really well as corporate professors and lawyers, right? We advise companies on how to achieve these goals. So this is where we step in and we need to decide on what are the corporate structures and what is the accountability that we're going to demand in this age of AI because we're already there. Okay. And so the question is not whether we're going to be there. We are here. Okay, we're already at this point. It's happened. And so let's learn from the challenges, but also from the successes. Let's put together a model that we can use successfully in the future so we can compete. And by the way, we're also competing with other nations on this. So we have to already be there. But as a corporate, I'm wearing my previous hat as a corporate lawyer, right? A client comes to you with this, you help them put the structure together. And this is what we do. We can think outside the box, but we follow the same stuff we would use otherwise. And that is transparency, right? Clear rules, governance. Let's put a structure together. And this is what we know how to do. And there's no reason of why we can't do it for here. And I always ask people, what bothers you, right? What is your gut feeling? Tell me what is the problem and we'll deal with it. But we first have to isolate the problem. We need to be clear because I'm hearing different problems with regards to this, which is natural whenever you have a new phenomena, right? But I always tell people, well, you're attacking this and you're attacking that. Tell me what bothers you. Once I know what bothers, we'll come up with the solution.
Yeah, so let's try to distill that because I actually, as you said that part, I kind of feel like OpenAI makes, we're both in higher education. OpenAI makes people nervous because all kinds of reasons. It makes people nervous because of the risk of cheating. It makes people nervous because of the risk of job loss. I mean, I saw a statistic, or actually it was my Dean Megan Carpenter repeated a statistic that 41% of legal jobs will be replaced by AI in 10 years. I actually disagree. I think 41% of legal tasks will be displaced by AI, but that's a conversation for another conversation.
I
But,
agree with you right away. I
yeah,
agree.
it's tasks and not jobs. And it's just a
Yeah.
question of I can distinguish that another time. But for now, I guess that's a huge amount of displacement. And it's a lot of retraining. People are really nervous about AI in general. So they're nervous about that. People are also very upset around wealth inequalities in society. They're worried about the future of humanity. Just 2 days ago, the Wall Street Journal had an op-ed that said World War III has already begun. That makes people nervous. It's a time of great tension. We haven't quite had our administration change, but that was not exactly a pleasant election cycle. We have maybe memories of January 6th as we get up to next January 6th. There's all kinds of things like this going on. So, what do you think people are so worried about when it comes to OpenAI and Elon Musk's role here? What can you kind of distill it to the key points that we should worry about?
Well, there's different people, so there's different groups. Some groups who compete with him are concerned that he's going to take more of a market share or that he will use his position to influence regulation that's going to benefit him. And, we haven't even talked about the fact he has XAI, right? He's also invested in the AI field. You mentioned Tesla briefly. I mean, that's the future. I mean, I would be shocked if Elon Musk didn't invest in those areas. Then he was one of the founders of OpenAI. So, of course, it's natural that he will be very much invested in this new area. So that's one group. And there are also his competitors that are concerned, and that's a legitimate concern. But it's a different concern than having the public concern of whether their jobs are going to diminish. And what about, we're in the universities, how are we going to educate our students? Are our students going to have job prospects? That's job security. Another is with regards to information privacy, right? That's a whole discussion, right? Is our information ever going to be protected in the future, or are we just giving that up? Another issue is really with regards to how reliable is this AI even? Are we just going to accept that we're going to live in the world of deep fake? And how is that going to affect us? And fourth, if any of you, and I have kids too, I mean, that story of the kid that committed suicide, it alarmed me as a parent. Who knows what our kids or even adults are exposed to when they're falling in love with AI? I mean, I'm like, serious? Yes, it's happening. And so, how are we protecting what's real, what's not real? How are we educating the future and the people? And so, really, it's so much going on. But I want to take us back to where I'm actually an expert, and that is corporate governance and technology firms. And what I think is that OpenAI's evolution highlights how these hybrid models are becoming more common in fields that are innovative like AI. That's the future. And so we need, and they will need scale, they need funding, and we need it for innovation. And the funding that's required is immense. And the question is, where do we want as a society this funding to come from? Do we want it to come from private sectors and then we open it up to invest? Do we want it to come from the government? And then how much do we want the government to be involved in regulating this? And so really what we have here is a blurring. We're blurring the lines between public and private. And that's exactly what I'm researching, right? I told you we have these blurring lines between not just public benefit and private profit, but overall, everything we're seeing that we kind of accepted before is blurring. And I say, let's go back to the basics. And that's what we teach, right? That's what we teach in corporate law and when we teach business associations. We can and we should create structures. This is what we're good at. That's why, by the way, in the US, we have the largest, most successful public companies. Why? Because we are good at designing structures. Let's create the governance. Let's create trust. Once we have this accountability and trust, then we can deal with the challenges that we're facing.
Yeah. And that brings us back and is a good point to end on too, because like we said, OpenAI started with a mission to serve humanity. And what I'm seeing in our conversation is the hard part of staying true to that mission with the realities of the world. It's interesting to me too, because my research is right now on university governance. And I'm looking at universities, which have become, we used to think of universities as ivory towers, where you have pure thought and you create pure knowledge for its own sake. And over the period of time, especially after the 2008 financial crisis, there was this huge move to make universities profitable, to have them partner with industry and this whole job ready movement. Those aren't really easy to reconcile missions, and they may not even be compatible with some of the missions around public universities that have obligations to their taxpayers of their state. So we're at a period of time, I think, where we do need to come back to this idea of missions. I wonder if to an extent people are burnt out because we're so used to corporate mission statements and the whole,
Oh,
cornflower and blue kind of bogus vanilla style mission
mm,
statement, that is meaningless gibberish. But, missions really do matter. And I think that's a really core takeaway. So we have a question of what AI was set out to do, but we also have questions around what the government should be doing and what institutions should be doing. And these are big questions. So I think we opened up more questions than we answered today. But to close things off, do you have any final thoughts on kind of where we're at with this open AI struggle, this particular struggle in front of us? And again, I want to really appreciate that, we've really touched on how big this is and how much this is about bigger stuff involving huge societal challenges. But how do you see this particular fight going down?
so what I think is going to happen, and again, I don't have a crystal ball, but if I had to guess, I would go back to the basics, just like in anything else. And I would think governance is key here. If I was a judge and I had to analyze what's in front of me, I would go back to the basics. And the basics is governance is key. And so, what I would recommend to a judge is to say, hey, hybrid models need strong oversight mechanisms. They need to ensure that they stay aligned with their mission. How are they accomplishing that? Those are the types of questions, if I were a judge, I would be asking. And I would ask, are there clear framework? Is there transparency? Are they losing public trust? And if so, why? Are they opening the door to mission drift, right? We talked about mission drift. They said they're going to do one thing and then they're drifting to doing something else. They're basically changing their mission, which is a big deal. By the way, for profit, it happens all the time. Entrepreneurs, they start with one idea, they incorporate a business. That's why when we incorporate for-profit businesses, we always tell the clients to do what? Make it as general as possible because you might switch, right? You might change. When you do it, you're going to realize, hey, you know what? This is not what's going to be successful, but we need to pivot here, right? But all of a sudden, where we talk about these hybrids, pivoting is hard. Why? Because we are concerned about fraud, right? Because we're not taking just profit into account here.
Yeah, it's also hard because in order to get that, especially with the 501c3, unlike, just to be clear for our listeners, like when you file to be a corporation, you do have to list your corporate purpose. And in general, the advice would be you write like any legitimate or legal business purpose because you don't want to be constrained by law in terms of what you do. That doesn't mean you can do anything because your investors could maybe sue you if you go off the rails. But in general, if you're conducting a business for profit, and you go ahead and you try to make profit, you're okay legally. But if you're a 501c3 and you've got special benefits in terms of your taxes, or if you're one of these hybrid organizations, you usually have to make a more particularized statement about your mission. You have to put that in a legal writing. You have to file it with the government, whether state or federal, and the government can hold you to that. And that adds a layer of challenge when it comes to what we talk about in the startup world, pivot. So it is hard for OpenAI to pivot from this. And that's why there's controversy that's legitimate, because they did bind themselves early on to a certain way of conducting business. And that makes it hard to change, and we see this in all kinds of ways. Like if you're a trust fund, there are all kinds of irrevocable trusts, or there are donations to an institution that are earmarked for a particular purpose. These constraints are real. They're real as a matter of law. They're real as a matter of ethics. So they're real here, and they could definitely impact how this story ends.
Yeah, and trust is key, Seth. Trust is key. I say that also, by the way, with regards to our financial institutions. That's why we're so successful, right? Because of trust, because the public trust our public markets, they trust our structures, they trust our courts and the judges. And so it's important to balance between innovation and accountability, between profit and purpose. And getting that balance right now looks very hard, but it's essential because you have to build trust in this system for that to work. And
Yeah.
so again, trust is key. And I hope that corporate lawyers, if you are out there, or advisors or policymakers, and if you're listening to us, please remember that trust is key. You do not want to lose the public's trust in this, because that's going to affect innovation and how we use this tool in the future.
Yeah, I kind of go back to that saying that trust takes a lifetime to build and a moment to destroy. And it is so valuable and yet fragile. So trust is the right note to end on. So Anat, thank you so much for sharing your insights today. This has been an incredible conversation on a lot of topics. I really appreciate you being willing to explore so many different things with me today.
Thank you so much, Seth. It's always an honor or privilege, and I love talking to you about these things.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining on this episode of Organized, the Business Law Breakdown. If you enjoyed this discussion, please subscribe, share, and let us know your thoughts using the comment features. Do you think OpenAI's hybrid model is the future of mission-driven organizations, or does it raise more problems than solutions? Let's keep the conversation going, and until next time, I'm Professor Seth C. Oranburg, and this has been Organized.